Hey everyone, welcome back to One Stop Tabletop. My name is Will, and today I'm going to be teaching you how I teach games. Recently I was talking to a coworker, and he explained to me that he really likes board games, but he really hates learning new board games, and this is actually a really common thing. The rule learning experience of board games can often be very rough for a lot of people, and teaching them can be very difficult for a lot of people. It honestly takes a lot of time before you learn how to effectively teach a board game well. Well, today I'm hoping that I can help you in being able to teach more people to play games. That way you have more people to play with. So let's go ahead and start looking at what we're going to be doing. Alright, before we start talking about how to actually teach games, I need to go over a really quick section for the etiquette of board games and teaching board games. The first part of the etiquette of teaching rules is have one person do the actual teaching and all the talking. It's very common to have a new person to a game and about 4 or 5 people who've played the game before know all the rules. Those 4 or 5 people tend to all want to tell the rules at the same time, and it gets very frustrating and difficult to actually learn the game when you have that many sources telling you what's going on. So dedicate one person to tell all the rules, and then when that person is done, they should also ask if there are any other rules that anyone wants to add in, or if you feel like you need to add in something, you can jump in at the end. But make sure that one person is done with teaching the rules before you start jumping in. Another small rule, and this won't really apply for most board games, but if you are getting into board games or miniatures games like Warhammer or things that people have actually painted and spent time on creating, always, always, always ask before you touch someone else's models. It sounds like a small thing, but there are people that will put 10 hours into painting one model, and if you just kind of go up and start grabbing their models, they don't like it a lot. I've had this happen, and it's not fun, especially when you are grabbing someone's model and you drop it and it breaks. You feel horrible, they're not very happy with you, and it's just a bad time. So if you're going to be touching other people's models that they have actually put time into and done some work, always, just always ask before touching. So that we're done with a few preliminary etiquette things to go over, let's start working on our preparations. So the first step for having good preparation for a board game is to know all the rules. You should know all the core concepts, all the core terms, everything that you're going to be teaching, and how they all interact and how they all work. Now, of course, there are some games that have very few core rules and just 1.5 million little tiny rules. Look at you, Warhammer 40K. For these games, make sure you know all of the core rules and the general things of what's going to be going on, and you'll have to go over the small rules as they come up to the best of your ability, but you should know all the core of what's going on. Next up in our preparation, if you're able to, you should have a demo play of your game, or just a small set of specific cards or tiles or game pieces that you can show exactly what all of the actions are going to be in the game, or what different moves you'll be making and strategies and things like that. So it's always good to have just a good idea of what is a basic setup that you can use to teach people. The last part of having good preparation for a board game is actually just know your audience. Know who you're teaching to and who you're talking to. Maybe ask some questions beforehand of what kind of games have they played, what kind of games do they like, just general things to know who it is that you're talking about, and that way you can figure out how you will teach the game to them. Maybe you can relate it to a game that they really like, or how certain actions are similar to that game, and maybe how they differ. This is just a really good way of just not only having a good experience for teaching, but just a much better experience for making friends and playing the game. So just know your audience, talk beforehand, try to figure out what kind of games the person likes and what they're looking for in the game. So now that we've done all of our preparations and getting ready and laying everything out, let's start actually teaching the game. Start with a broad summation of your game. Just 1 or 2 sentences about what the game is about, what you'll be doing, what the theme is, what the goals are, what you're trying to get, and just a really quick summary, and then that way everything can be put into context for what it is that you're doing. The very next step of what you should teach is how to win. What are the goals? What are you trying to achieve? How do you actually win the game? Are there victory points? Is it a time limit? Is it a turn limit? Are you trying to capture a specific unit or piece? Make sure you go over all of these things first. That way when you are teaching the rest of the game, whoever's learning the game has those firmly in their mind as they're learning the rest of the rules. Right after that, I would recommend going to how the game actually ends. What are the ending conditions of the game? Especially do this if there are more than one conditions that end the game. It'll be very important to know all of them and keep those in your mind as well while you're learning all of the rules. The next part that you're going to teach is what you do on a turn-by-turn basis. This is going to essentially be the rules of the game, how you play, what the turn order is, how things will work on an individual turn, and all the things that you can do. This is generally summed up the best by answering the question of, on your turn, you can insert whatever actions that you're going to be doing on your turn there. You still want to keep things a bit general. Don't go into too much specifics on like really unique things that kind of only happen once per game or only when a specific card gets played. Try to keep it into the general actions of what the game is going to be doing. The people that are being taught the game will probably have a lot of questions at this point, and this is a perfect time to be answering those questions. But do sometimes tell them that you will answer certain questions later, just so you can keep your own flow going and figure out how to best teach the game. Now, as a quick aside, one of the worst things that you can do while teaching someone a board game is just teach them all the rules all at once and expect them to know everything without ever having played the game before. One of the best things that you can do, if you're able, is to teach the rules as you're playing the game. Figure out what the core parts of the game are, or at least what are the parts of the game that you can do early on, and just ignore the parts that can be done later. Teach those as they start coming up and as they start becoming useful. Now, of course, not every game can do this. There are just some games where you just have to learn all the rules and hope for the best. But if you are fortunate enough to be playing a game where you can break up the rules as you play, absolutely do that. It makes it much easier to learn and much more fun to learn also. I'm actually going to be showing an example of this later on in the video so you can see how I do it. As the final step of teaching a board game, I always recommend to everyone go back over the victory conditions again. Just that way you got the victory conditions before you learned the rules. So as you learn the rules, you're trying to figure out how to win, hopefully. But often you forget. I forget all the time. So it's really handy of just before you start playing the game or playing a demo hand, remind people what the victory conditions are, what they're trying to go through. That way you get it both before and after learning the rules, and it just makes for a much better experience. Often games will use a lot of sort of single use or fiddly, unique mechanics that will arise. Try to keep those to the end of teaching the game, or even just teach them as they arise, if possible, in your game. These are the kind of things that can kind of throw off the flow of teaching a game or just really make things confusing. So I always recommend try to keep those as a separate section of your sort of teaching flow than the very beginning or while you're teaching the core stuff. Another thing to talk about, although it's totally optional, is strategies. What are some of the things that you can be going for in the game just to kind of help guide the new players of what they should be working towards? I don't recommend this for every game. I don't recommend this for every player. This is one of those things where you need to know your audience, know who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone who doesn't really play a lot of board games, you probably don't need to teach them all of the strategies or just anything. Just give them one or two of the basic strategies that work really well, and they're off to go. If you're playing with someone who plays a lot of board games all the time, they might actually enjoy knowing that there are like 4 or 5 different really good strategies kind of thing. So again, know your audience, and if they want it, talk about some of the strategies of the game. In addition to teaching the strategies from someone else, if you find that you are in a group of people who have never played the game at all before, but you've been playing for like 4 or 5 years and you're just an expert at the game, I recommend that you actually try a different strategy from what it is that you normally do. I do this all the time when I'm teaching new games to people, is I will teach them all the rules, teach them what to do. I might teach them a strategy or two, and I will use a different strategy from my normal. This is not only just a great way to kind of level the playing field between new players and expert players, but also as an expert player, you should be learning all the different strategies that are available to you. There might be a strategy that you don't find as fun, but maybe is a game-winning strategy. It is much better than the one that you find more fun. Maybe you just aren't very skilled at one of the other parts of the games, and playing this way will help you increase the skill of that side of the game that you just normally don't even touch. So again, I recommend that you try a different strategy from what you normally do, maybe the strategy that you're the worst at, when you're teaching brand new players. Just kind of even out the playing field. Last but not least, play a demo hand. Give everyone a couple cards, set up the table with a few little pieces here and there. Just let people experience for a turn or two how things will interact, how they'll work, how things just go. And from there, you can give them a much better, solid idea of how all the rules work, and you can get a lot of questions out of the way and maybe some misconceptions that they had. After that, shuffle everything back in, restart the game, and start from the actual beginning. So to give you a good example of how I like to teach a board game by breaking it up into different steps and teaching as I play, basically making the entire game one big demo hand, I'm going to teach you how I play and how I would actually teach one of my favorite games, Betrayal at House on the Hill. It's a fantastic game, super fun, and this is a great game for actually teaching how to teach games because so much of this game can be broken up and dished out into little tiny steps as you play. So let's go ahead and start shuffling things, setting up the board, and let's start playing. If you've never played the game, Betrayal at House on the Hill is a horror-themed adventure game where 3 to 6 players will be exploring a house and expanding and encountering different events and items and omens, and eventually one of the players is going to turn on all the other players and betray them. And from there, you get to play one of 100 different horror-themed scenarios where the game totally changes and a lot of the rules get broken and changed. And it's awesome. The objective of the game is survive. Just keep exploring and keep trying to survive, and at some point you might have to start fighting off a whole bunch of baddies and monsters. The actual victory condition will change from game to game since there are 100 different scenarios that you can play. Each one will have a different ending condition. Typically in this it boils down to one of two conditions where either the players are the only ones left standing and all the monsters and baddies are dead, or it's the players escape from the house somehow. On your turn, you'll very likely be moving and exploring new rooms in the house. Sometimes you'll be making combat rolls against different monsters or players. Sometimes you'll just be doing a skill check for one of the rooms or for trying to find something in a room or one of the event cards that pops up. So now that we have all of our basic summation of the game, let's go ahead and look at setting up the game, and then we'll start actually teaching how to play the specific parts of the game. Betrayal at House on the Hill uses a bunch of room tiles to show where your players are and what they're doing. There are a number of these landing tiles, which are the ones that are completely blank on the backside. So find all of these that you have, there should be 3 or 4 of them, and go ahead and put them down. You can put them anywhere on the table. They're really just representative of different layers of the house. So you have the ground floor, the attic, the basement, things like that. And it doesn't really matter where they are on the table, and honestly, you're going to be moving them around a lot as you play because as the house expands, you're going to need some table space for it. After you've done a basic board setup, you will have each player choose a character. Now, each character has different stats and abilities that are associated with it, but honestly, when you're going with new players, you can tell them it doesn't really matter what character you take. And really, it kind of doesn't, because while each character does have different starting stats and ending stats, these stats that will end up being important depend on what scenario it is that you play. And since you don't know what scenario it is that you're going to be playing, you never really know what stat it is that's going to be useful for you. So just tell them, go ahead and grab any character. Doesn't really matter which one, whichever one they think looks best, has the best description, maybe has a stat that they think will be really important. You never know, have them grab one and we'll go ahead and get started. So stats in this game are actually called traits. And you'll notice that each player has 4 different traits. They have speed, might, knowledge, and sanity. Each of these traits can actually be categorized into 2 different types. There are physical traits and there are mental traits. Sometimes when you have an effect or something that will call for a physical trait, you will choose from either speed or might, or if you do from a mental trait, you'll choose between either knowledge or sanity. Each of your characters will have a different slider that will go to point to the starting stat. The starting stat is the one stat that is green or differently colored. Sometimes it also might help if you want to put your slider on the top of the card rather than sliding on it, but as you can see, when you shake it, it might move. Later editions of this game, they actually solved the problem of them moving around, of making the little slider a little bit thicker and a little bit better to use. So depending on which edition you have, you can probably put them on the side and it'll be totally fine. Paper clips also work really well, or if you really feel like doing it, pad and paper. There's also apps. There's different versions of these characters you can get, so keeping track of stats is pretty easy. Each character also has a little token piece, so go ahead and grab the token piece for your character, put all of those into the entrance hall of the ground floor, which is the big, long, 3-tiled one that I showed you earlier. Go ahead and put them there, and we're going to start learning how to actually play the game. When teaching what you can actually do on your turn, this is where I like to start breaking the game down into different components and teaching as you go along. When you actually look at what you can do on the game when you're teaching everything, you're allowed to do a move, discover a room, you can use an item or an omen card, you can attempt a die roll, and you can make an attack. That's a lot of different things that you can do on just one turn, and that's kind of a lot of things to have to teach someone when you first start the game. So instead, I like to break it down to the few things that you can actually do once you start playing the game. And when you actually start playing the game, there are really only 2 actions that you can do. You can move, and you can explore new rooms. So those are the only 2 rules that I teach. I don't teach anything about using items, about doing any combat rolls, about any kind of events or cards or anything like that. I just teach those 2 things and that's it. So I'll go ahead and teach you how that works. When you want to move, you will first look at the speed trait on your character card. The number that you have is the maximum number of rooms that you are allowed to move in any one turn. Now, this is a cumulative number, so you can actually move more than once in a turn if you move less than your maximum value each of those times. So if your speed is 4, you can move, let's say, 1 room earlier in your turn, then later on you can move 3 rooms if you want. So we're going to go ahead and move our character just 1 space, and then we're going to do the explore action. When we set up the game, we actually put a stack of room tiles face down somewhere on the table. This stack of room cards is going to be used every time that you explore for a new room. So you will take a look at the top card that is face down on the stack, and you will compare that card to where you are in the house. There are 3 or 4 layers if you have the expansion. Layers to the house. There is the basement, ground floor, upper floor, and the rooftop. So whichever section you are in the house, if that is lit up on the back side of the room tile, then you can go ahead and place that room tile in the area where you are in. So basically what that means is you start off on the ground floor. When you see the first tile of the room, if ground floor is lit up and shown, then you are allowed to put that room on the ground floor. If ground floor is not lit up, so if it just says basement or it just says upper or both of those, but no ground floor, you cannot put that room into the house. So you simply discard it and pick up the next room tile. You'll be discarding a lot of rooms this way as you cycle through, and eventually all of the rooms do get recycled back in. So theoretically, you could use every single tile in the house. So let's go ahead and lay down the tile that we just drew. You'll notice that all of the rooms have 1 or more doors that are outlined in yellow. These are very important because when you are placing a new room into the house, the door that you came through has to line up with at least 1 door in the new room. Often this means that the shape of the rooms, there will be doorways that lead into the walls of other rooms, which actually means that it's treated as though there's no door there at all. You can only go from room to room if there is a door both on the tile that you are leaving and the tile that you are going into. So if there's no matching doors, that's totally fine, but the doorway that you came in through does have to line up with at least 1 door of the room that you are placing down. Now you may notice that there's nothing actually in this room. It's actually pretty bare, and that's a good thing because that means that we can keep moving. If you're exploring a room and you are ever forced to draw a card, your movement for the turn completely ends. You are not allowed to move at all for the rest of your turn. You can still do any of the other actions that you'd normally be able to do, you just can't move anymore. So let's go ahead and explore again, and we'll move a little bit over to the left here, and we'll draw a new room tile. So the room that we drew is called the game room, and you'll notice that there's a symbol just above the name for the game room. This is the same symbol that is on the back side of one of the decks of cards for the event deck. So when you explore this room and you enter into it, you have to draw an event card. The event card that we drew is called the Voice, and we can show you the structure of how these event cards work. The top part here in the bold is the title. The italicized text is giving you the nice flavor and backstory of what's going on, followed by some interesting more little backstory and flavor, and then what you actually have to do for the event. Now, I always tell people, if we're playing with people that we've played a lot of, you have to read the title and you have to read the italicized, preferably in the creepiest voice possible. But after that, if you don't feel comfortable reading out loud to other people, or you don't want to help, or you just want to continue on with your turn, it's totally fine. If you actually do want to read it out for everyone else, totally fine as well. So for this one, we have to make a knowledge roll, and we have some results here. So here's where we're going to start getting into traits and what traits actually do. Anytime that you are told to make a knowledge roll, a sanity roll, a might roll, or a speed roll, this is called a trait roll because you're rolling for your traits. So how these work is you will take your character card, you will look and see what the stats are for what's being called for. Right now it's knowledge, so we're going to look at whatever our knowledge is. The stat that your slider is currently pointing to, that is how many dice you will roll. So go ahead and roll all of those dice and count the number of pips that show up on the die after they're rolled. The combined total of all of your pips is the result that you got. You compare that result to whatever the action is that's calling for the trait roll. In this case, if we got 4 or more pips, then we would find something on the floor and we draw an item card. Awesome. If we got 3 or fewer pips after our roll, then we don't find anything at all. Most of the time when an event card is done, you will just discard it back to the discard pile. If not, the card will actually tell you to keep it out for whatever specific reason or to put down a token. So now we are out of movement for our turn because we have encountered a room that forced us to draw a card. Unfortunately, when you want to explore a room, you are forced to move, and since we can't move, we can't explore. So our turn is over. But that's alright, because now it's the next person's turn. So our next player is going to move 2 rooms and explore. And the room that they're going to explore this time is the collapsed room. And this is another great example to show how trait rolls work. This time, instead of it being from a card, it's actually going to be from the room that calls for the trait roll. This is a tricky one because it is a speed roll, and if you fail, you actually fall into the basement. Very terrible. Not a lot of fun. And can do some damage to you. This is also a great opportunity to show you how rolling for damage can work. So, first we will make our trait roll, and we will look at our character, see what our speed value is. We will roll that many dice. We will check how many pips are face up from the dice that we have rolled, and if it is equal to or higher than the number that we need, which in this case is 5 or higher, then we will not fall through. However, if we fall into the basement, you'll notice that the room says, if you fall there, take 1 die of physical damage. Now, anytime that you have something that calls for a die of some type of damage, what you do is you actually take one of your dice, you roll it, and the number of pips that show up, that is how much damage that you take. So you could take 0, and you could take 1, and you could take 2. You just never know. Let's go ahead and assume that we were really unlucky and we failed our speed roll, which means we have to fall into the basement, and that's unfortunate. Let's also assume that the worst happened and we rolled a 2 when we were rolling for our damage. Also sucks. So we're taking 2 points of damage. But how does damage actually work? Let's take a look at our character card. For every point of damage that we're taking, we have to reduce one of our trait values by 1. Now, this is not a -1 to the stat value. This is actually moving the little slider down by 1. Sometimes this means you'll go from something like a 5 to a 3, even though you only took 1 point of damage. So, if you took 2 points of damage, that means you have to move a slider down 2 spaces. But we took 2 points of physical damage. So anytime that you take physical or mental damage, you are allowed to split up the damage between the 2 traits that are associated with them. So since we took 2 points of physical damage, we can split that up if we want into speed or might. So we can take 2 points from speed, 2 points from might, or 1 from each, which is what we're going to go ahead and do. So I'll take my card, I will slide 1 from might, 1 from speed down, and then we'll continue on. So now, again, just like before, we are out of movement, we're out of any kind of actions, really nothing else we can do. So, next player's turn. We will go ahead and move 2 spaces, go ahead and explore just like before, and, oh, look at that. We got the chapel. You'll notice that there is an event card symbol here, and there's also some text in the room card itself. Now, this is a one-time use per character, so every character could use it once. But you'll also notice that it says once per game, if you end your turn here, you gain 1 sanity. This means that you do not gain the sanity right away as soon as you explore the card because there is a small chance that the event card that you have drawn will actually move you to another room. So, in effect, you did not end your turn in that room. So this is a great chance to teach people how, when things say like end of your turn, and it's very specific on rooms, that how these different things work. So that is the first round of a game of Betrayal House on the Hill. We've actually already learned most of how the game works. We just need a few more times doing each of these things to like really cement it in how it works. So we're going to go back to our first player. He's going to move 2 spaces and he's going to explore a new room. And what did we get? The dining room. The dining room, as you'll notice, has a new symbol that we haven't seen before. This is for the omen cards. So you will draw a card, meaning that our movement for the turn has ended, and you will read off, just like an item card, what the name is and the little italicized part, and if you want to keep it to yourself, you can read what the effect is. Now, every omen card at the very bottom is going to say something that says, make a haunt roll now. Now, haunt rolls are what trigger the betraying of the game and change it into the one of 100 different storylines that's going on. A haunt roll is also very distinct from a trait roll in that you are not rolling based on number of traits or anything like that. You are actually always going to roll 6 dice. The number that you are trying to match or get higher than is the number of omen cards that have been drawn throughout the game already. So if you've had 3 omen cards that have been drawn so far, including the one that you just drew, then you'll need to get 3 or higher, or 3 or more pips, when you roll 6 dice. If you fail this roll, you roll under the number of omen cards that have been drawn, the betrayal starts. One of your players is betraying, and you will play one of those 100 scenarios, and it's totally awesome. A lot of the rules are going to change, a lot of things are going to be different, but it still works really, really well. So for the sake of teaching the game, let's just assume that we failed our haunt roll. We rolled fewer number of pips on the die than there were omen cards that were drawn. So what happens? Well, there is a chart in the book where you will look up for what the room was that was just discovered that had the omen card and the omen card that was actually drawn. You look on the chart, and where it crosses is the scenario that you'll be playing. There's also a second chart that you look at for showing all of the scenarios and who the betrayer actually is. It's not always the person who fails the roll. Sometimes it's just the person to your left or to your right, or it could be based on your characters that you took. It could be whoever has the highest knowledge, or the lowest knowledge, whoever has the highest strength, the highest speed. It could just go off of the character's age, or maybe even what they like. You never really know what you're going to get, and that's awesome. So we've looked on the chart, and we found that we are playing a scenario called The Feast. Now there are 2 new rule books that we'll be passing out. One is for the betrayer specifically, and the other is for all the other players. At this point, you'll probably want to have the betrayer leave the room so that he can read all of his rules, while the players read all of their new rules. And then everyone can formulate their own strategies. You have the betrayer come back in, set up his board, and you begin playing again. Now, if this is a new person's turn playing and they just happen to become the betrayer, they might want to stay in the same room and have a couple people help them out. But if you want to have them lead and have them try it out, that's also fine. That's awesome for them too. Just know that they will probably have a lot of questions when they come back, and that's totally fine. So after a little time of playing through some of your scenario, you're probably going to get into a combat scenario. And we haven't talked about combat yet, and we really should, because it's really simple and it's a lot of fun. So our mighty hero here is being attacked by 2 creatures, and we need to fight them off. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare an attack on one of the monsters, and we're going to look at our stats. Our might, we'll say, is currently 4. So we roll 4 dice, and oh, look at that. We got 5 pips showing, so our attack is 5. We'll look at the defense of the monster here that we're fighting, and its might is also 4. Alright, so we'll roll 4 dice, and ooh, they got a 7. Well, whoever rolls the highest is the winner of the combat, and the lowest is, of course, the loser. Now, you take the difference of the highest roll and the lowest roll, and whoever the loser is, that is the number of points that it takes, of damage that they take. So there is a 2-point difference between 7 and 5, so we unfortunately take 2 points of damage. Now, anytime you're doing a standard combat damage scenario, it is physical damage, so we can do between the speed and might that we did before with falling into the basement. But there are some times when people will make specific attacks, and usually it will be like it is a knowledge attack or a speed attack. When these kind of things happen, you do have to take damage in the specific stat of the same type that they're attacking with. And that's the basics of combat. It's pretty simple, it's a lot of fun, good dice rolling. Oftentimes there are people that will have cards that can augment their roll. You could add 2 dice or get to re-roll dice and things like that. But these you don't even have to explain unless someone actually gets the items. Usually items are weapons, and weapons can only be used, you can only use one weapon at a time, unless it says otherwise. So there's just a couple other small rules, but again, if someone doesn't have an item that is like 2-handed only or 2 one-handed weapons, you don't even need to explain how they work, and it's still a lot of fun. And there you have it. That's just about all the rules for playing Betrayal House on the Hill. There's a couple other like fiddly small rules here and there, and of course the scenario rules will change all the time, but that's all the basics that you ever need to know. And I really hope that this was a good example to show you how I like to break down games and teach them slowly over time. Again, not every game is going to be able to be taught this way. Sometimes you just have to teach all the rules up front and just help people out as they go along. But if you are able to, this is a fantastic way to teach and learn a game slowly over time and sort of expand as you play. So I really want to encourage you to find any games that you can where you don't have to teach all of the rules up front. Just enough to get the basics, and you can get the more advanced stuff out of the way later. Alright everyone, that wraps up this video. I hope that you had a lot of fun, I hope that you learned a lot, and I really hope that everyone can get better at teaching rules. It's an art, it's a science, it's difficult, but the more that you do it, the better you'll get at it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, you can like and subscribe, or you can always like and share if you want to spread this channel and make it a little bit better. Feel free to send this video to any of your friends or family members, or just about anyone who's interested in board gaming. Hope you guys have a great time and learn all those rules.